Hello everyone, I'm just gonna go ahead and start the stream just to check out if everything is working fine or not. Everyone can hear me okay? You can see my screen also. You can write in the chat. Actually, that's the only way to communicate. So you can always write in the chat. Let me know if you can see the screen. Let me go ahead and see some stuff over here. Okay, let's see. All right. Good morning. We have 5 minutes, so we'll wait for 5 minutes. If you want, you can go ahead and type in the chat your name, which city are you from, so that I get to know my audience, like where you're tuning in from. So that will be great. I'm from Houston. I'll start, I guess. I'm from Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas. And extremely hot over here. I think the temperature goes to 115, 120 Fahrenheit. So with humidity, it can be brutal. Definitely can be brutal. Actually, I'm actually sweating right now, even in my home office. So hot. Argentina. Hello, Martin from Argentina. Thank you for joining. I think there's a conference going on, or they will be happening in November in Argentina. In November, yeah. Atlanta, Georgia. Okay. India. Atlanta. I was just in Atlanta in January, I think, or yeah, I think in January. Just for a couple of days. Nothing crazy. Oops. What am I doing? Okay, let me see what's going on over here. Oh, I clicked on the wrong one. Maury Lamin is from Chicago. Chicago, that's great. Dilipan Ravi from Hello from India. Martin is saying, will you travel to Argentina in November? No, I'll be working. I didn't even apply for the conference. I don't remember the name of the conference, but I didn't even apply because I'll be working, so I can't really go. I will be going to try Swift New York in September, from September 5th till September 7th. So I'm doing a small workshop over there for machine learning. So I will be obviously going to New York in September to do that workshop. But no, I definitely want to travel to Argentina. I mean, there are a lot of countries over there that I want to visit. Argentina is definitely one of them. Yeah. All right, we'll wait for 3 more minutes and then we will start. So if you are just joining in, go ahead and put your name in the chat and where are you from? Where are you located? Okay, let's see. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and once the session starts, then you can obviously go ahead and put your questions in the chat. All right. All right, I'll be right back in 2 seconds. Dad, don't fight on anything, my session starts. Hello, Lakshman Reddy. Then we have, where do you live now? I live in Houston, Texas, USA. So, yep. All right. So let's see. Okay, 6:30. Let's go ahead and get started. I have just a couple of slides. Obviously, I'm going to show you how you can start using SwiftData. And hopefully after this particular session, you will have a much better idea of SwiftData, or at least an introduction to SwiftData, so you can get started and you can start building SwiftData apps. Keep in mind that SwiftData is obviously not even released yet. It's still in beta version, okay? So here's something about me a little bit. My name is Mohammad Azam. I go with my name Azam. I'm on Twitter. You can follow me at Azam Sharp. I'm an iOS developer as well as a coding bootcamp instructor. So that's my day job. I teach for a coding bootcamp, and I'm also an instructor on Udemy and LinkedIn. And I've authored a couple of different books, and I also speak at different conferences. All right. And that's pretty much it. I mean, that is my introduction. And now we will go and look into SwiftData. So if you search for SwiftData on Apple documentation website or on Apple documentation, the link is right there. This is their page. This is their home page kind of for SwiftData. One thing to note over here is that it is still in beta version. So I would not recommend it to, to use it right now. I mean, I guess you cannot even deploy your app because it's only available in iOS 17. So even if you use it, you can't really deploy the app because probably in around like September, October, when iOS 17 will actually be released, then you can deploy those apps. So you can definitely create apps using SwiftData, but I don't think you'll be able to deploy anything. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with SwiftData. We're going to create a very simple budget application where you can add a budget for, let's say, vacation. You have a budget for food and groceries and things like that. And we will also try to see that if we can add transactions to the budget. First of all, the font size. Let me know if the font size is okay for everyone. If the font size is okay, go ahead and type or thumbs up or something in the chat so that I will know that the font size is okay with you. All right, and I know that there is a bit of a delay of when you hear and see what I'm showing you. So I'll wait a little bit to make sure that I am getting your messages. So let me know in the chat, in the comments, in the YouTube chat, that if you can see the screens correctly or not. Okay, so hopefully you're able to see the screen. That's good. No? You're not able to see the screen? It's too small? 2. Okay, let me see what size do we have over here. It's already 24. That's pretty large. Okay, so 24, it should be pretty big actually for you. Okay. So SwiftData is actually built on top of core data. All right, but it's all code, meaning you don't really have to create those design files that you were creating the models in core data. You can write everything in code. So that makes it much nicer, much easier to use. Kind of reminds me of Realm framework from MongoDB. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a budget. Budget means that I'm creating a budget for vacation or groceries, or a budget for food or books or entertainment, movies, things like that. And so for that, I'm going to go ahead and add a new folder, models, because that will be our budget model. The same model that you were creating using core data in a model file, you can create in SwiftData also. And keep in mind that the basic part of SwiftData is that you will be storing information on the device itself, which can be synced to iCloud, but we're not going to go that far to sync it to the iCloud, but it can. So basically, it's kind of like a replacement for core data. Now, inside my models, since I want to capture the budget, I'm going to add a new Swift file, and I'll call it budget. All right. It's obviously an empty file. There's really nothing going on in the file itself. So I'm going to go ahead and add a file, a class over here that represents a budget. But first, let me go ahead and import SwiftData. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create a class. Now, it has to be a class because you'll see in a moment that this will be a very special class. It will be decorated with something called a model macro. So this model is introduced in iOS 17, and this model is a macro that can only be applied on the classes. So it cannot really be applied on a struct. So that's the thing about this macro. And let me show you which Xcode I'm using. I'm using version 15 beta 2. I know that they just released Xcode 15 beta 5. I actually have that. But beta 5 still has some issues with SwiftData, so I'm still using beta 2, but there are not many changes in terms of SwiftData, all right? Apart from that Xcode 15 beta 5 has some issues with SwiftData not working in the previews, all right? Okay, so we have this now. We have a budget class, and that's going to represent our actual budget. It has to be a class. It cannot be a struct. Next thing, I want to go ahead and add some sort of a property that I want to save. So I need to save the name of the budget as well as the limit of the budget. Limit simply means that I shouldn't really go over this particular limit. So if my limit for entertainment is 200, this limit value will be 200. I can also use some of the other stuff that is available, like attribute over here. I think it's like a property wrapper if I go over and see it. There we go. So it's an attached macro. And this is also introduced in SwiftData or iOS 17. This attribute can have many different things, but what we want is all of our names for the budget should be unique. So if I'm adding a budget for entertainment, I cannot use the same exact name for the budget. So it has to be different. All right. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add an initializer. That is a requirement that you should have an initializer. And that's it. That is our budget class. All right. So if I persist this information, if I want to save this budget, then I will have to create an instance of the budget and simply save it. So let's go back to our content view over here. Content view is kind of like our view, which is responsible for displaying the interface over here. The interface doesn't really allow us to do anything right now. You can see it's kind of like a basic interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this particular file into something else. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this. Instead of content view, because content view doesn't really make any sense, I'm going to rename this. And this is just what I'm doing. I mean, you don't have to do that. But I can say budget list screen. Budget list screen is a little bit more descriptive. It's basically saying that, oh, this screen or this view is actually going to list a budget. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this Xcode previews. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and add another folder over here and going to add another over here screens as a folder and just drag and drop this over here, just so that my stuff is organized. Okay, so let me go ahead and build the application again. So every screen that I'm going to be adding to my application, it will be represented or it will be inside the screens folder, like the budget list screen. Let's go ahead and take a look at our preview. How does it look like? I mean, the preview is still the same. I mean, obviously, we haven't really created anything over here. So now what I want to do is I want to create a form. Okay, so and that form will allow us to take input for the actual name of the budget as well as the limit. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a state variable over here. So state private var name. So that's the first one. And the limit that I'm going to be taking input will be of type double because it's a number. So now I have these two state variables in my application in my budget list screen. If I'm taking a lot of inputs like name and limit and this and that, like 5 or 6 different things related to the budget, then I will think about creating a structure or struct to represent that data. But right now, we only have name and limit, so 2 are perfectly fine, or even 3 are fine. Okay? All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and create the form. So let's go ahead and quickly create the form, and I'm going to see if I can kind of like copy it from somewhere and then we can go over it, because this is mostly like the UI stuff, and you obviously know a little bit how to create the UI part. So there we go. I just created a user interface over here. There we go. You can see on the right hand side how we are creating the user interface. Okay, so I have a form. It has a section called new budget, and I can actually maximize this screen so you can see it much better. There we go. We have a text field for a name. We have a text field for a limit. We have a button to save. The other thing that I want to do is I want to only enable the save button when the form is valid. Right now the form is not valid because I haven't really entered anything in the name and the limit text boxes. So let's go ahead and add that kind of a condition. So I'm going to just go ahead and do it over here. Private var is form valid, boolean, and name if the name is not empty, and also the limit is not null, meaning you have entered something in the limit. So then the form is valid. But is empty doesn't really take into account that you can actually enter some spaces in there. So make sure that you fix that, because right now I can just tab or press spaces and it will cause the same issue. All right. So one way to fix that is to just create an extension and then do all of that stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and create extension on that. This is kind of like not related to what we're trying to do, but I guess we can quickly create that. We can create a string extensions, and the extension will simply, I'm just going to copy it over here. It's going to be called is empty or white space. So it's going to check for white space also. And now I can go back over here and use is empty or white space, so that you cannot even enter white space. That will not be allowed. Okay. And in order for the button to be available, we can say is disabled, or sorry, disabled. So we can disable the button by saying is form valid. So now you can see in our Xcode preview that the button is disabled, but if I start typing over here, like the budget for food is, let's say, 200, as soon as I type in something over here, the button is enabled. Like if I type in some letters in my limit field, then it's not available. So you can see over here, now it's working out fine. All right. So right now we haven't really done any SwiftData. We just created this form, but the next step would be to actually save the data. So I'm going to go ahead and call a function called save budget. This function is not here. We have to create this function. So I'm just going to go ahead and say function save budget. There we go. And inside this, we will save the budget. But before we save the budget, we can go ahead and make sure again that all the stuff is correct. So I'm just going to go ahead and unwrap the limit. I'm also going to check again that if the name is not empty or white space. This is kind of like an extra thing that I'm doing over here. This part is going to make sure that the button is enabled or disabled, so you can't even click on the button, but only a few lines. You can make this a little bit more part of save budget also if you want to. All right. Next, we will create the budget. So I'll create the budget, passing in the name, passing in the limit, because these are the two things that the budget needs. And then we need to save it. Now in SwiftData, if you want to save something, just like core data, and you were using core data with SwiftUI, you have to access the manage object context. In SwiftData, you need to access a model context. And the way that you will access a model context is in the preview, you can simply go ahead and insert over here model container. You can see the model container is not even coming up over here, but it will. Model container, let me go ahead and type it out. Model container. And you can pass in the model container over here, like whatever the model container you're trying to build. So I believe we can type in for, and I can save budget.self. All right. Let's go ahead and build it. Doesn't really think that it has any model container. Kind of weird. Do we have, so make sure you import SwiftData. Again, we're having that issue. SwiftData, make sure you import that. And now if I type in model container over here, there we go, it shows up. And I can pass in the type that I want, which is budget.self. If you had other types like transaction for each budget, then you can pass the transaction over here, or you can only pass the budget. If a budget has a relationship with transactions, then those types will automatically be inferred. So you don't have to pass in all the models over here unless those models are kind of independent and they don't really have any relationship with other models. Okay. Let me go ahead and build it again. Okay, that is fine. So everything is okay over here. Keep in mind that when we add these things to the preview, this is only available for the preview. It's not available when you actually run your app on the simulator or when you run your app on the device. So for that, it's very important that you make sure you inject that in the budget app file. Right over here, we inject it right here. This is going to make sure that when the app actually runs in a simulator or in your device, it has access to the model container, and the model container will be responsible for giving you access to SwiftData or to persist information in SwiftData. Okay, let's go back to the budget list screen. If you have any question, go ahead and type it out in the chat. I am looking at the chat, so if you have any question, I'll be able to answer that. Okay. All right, so now we have injected the model container over here. And if I want to save my budget model to the database, I will get access to the model context through the use of environment. So I'll just get access to the model context. It's kind of like the NS manage object context in core data, but it's called model context instead of manage object context. Once you have access to the model context, you can simply go ahead and insert it. Context.insert budget. And you're done. That's it. That is how easy and simple it is to save the information into SwiftData using SwiftUI. Now you might be wondering, hold on a second. If I type in context over here, there is a save function. Why didn't you call the save function? Although you can call the save function, and that's fine, it's not mandatory, it's not necessary. And the reason is that the insert will be called automatically whenever the UI changes or whenever Swift UI feels like that it needs to save the information. So even though the save function is actually there, but it's not required that you call save. So if you remember when you were working with core data, if you have worked with core data, you always had to call save function or else it's not going to save. But in SwiftData, you don't have to call the save function because the insert is going to save based on the UI related events. So Swift UI is just going to automatically save it, in other words. All right, so you don't have to call that. So you can see in a couple of lines of code, we were able to save the information into the database. But what good is the information in the database when we cannot see the information? So let's go ahead and see how we can fetch the information. I mean, if I go ahead and type something out over here, let's say that if I type in food and I say $200 and I say save. I mean, it's saved, but we don't know if it's saved or not because we can't really display anything on the screen. So let's go ahead and fetch the information and see if we can display it on the screen. All right. When you want to fetch the information from SwiftData, you use the query modifier. And I can say private, and query modifier can take other stuff also like sorting and filtering. You can see all of those things coming up. I don't really want to do anything right now. I just want to get all the different budgets that have been added to our database. So there we go. That's it. So this is going to fetch all the information. And now if I want to display all the different budgets in my app, all I need to do is to create a list and then display it. So I'm just going to go ahead and create another section over here. And I will simply call it budgets. And we can use a list. We can go over the budgets. Budget in, and what are we doing? Budget.name or something? Budget.name. Let's see if it displays something. There we go. You see that? Food. It's already there. Right over here, we were able to display the food because we just inserted food like 2 seconds ago. All right. A couple of other things that you may note over here is that when we created the budget model, we never created the ID. We also didn't really do identifiable. We are not conforming it to identifiable because it is already conforming to identifiable. So we don't need that. So don't do that. We also don't need to create an ID. Some people will go and create an ID like this. No, we don't need that. The ID is already there. And you can check that the ID is already there because if you create a budget, you can actually access the ID. It's already there. And this is a unique ID. So you don't really need to create another one. I mean, unless for some reason you want to, but you don't really need to. All right. Let's go ahead and add another budget item. The good thing about this query modifier is, or this query, is whenever this query is being run, or whenever, you insert data into the actual SwiftUI SwiftData database, SQLite database, it automatically refreshes your interface, which is great. I mean, you don't have to do anything because it's all kind of like reactive behind the scene. All right. Let's see over here. I'm just looking at if there's any questions over here. Okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead and add another budget. So I'm going to go ahead and add another budget for vacation. And let's say this budget is $500. I'm going to save. You can see that when I enter, it automatically refreshes, which is super cool that we can do that without writing any code, without fetching anything, without doing anything. It's all very nice, reactive, declarative kind of programming that we are getting from SwiftData. And yes, it was also available in core data, but in core data, we had to create our data mapping files and all that stuff. I think this is a little bit more simpler. All right. Any questions? All right. Now, if your view, meaning currently we're just displaying a text over here, but if your view is getting a little bit more complicated, then probably it's a good idea to create this into a separate control. like a budget view control or something like that. You can decide that when it's time to create that control. That's kind of like up to you. So if I want to add something over here, I can. Like if I want to add also the budget amount, the limit, remember each budget has a limit, right? But we're not even displaying the limit. So what if I wanted to display the limit? Well, I can display the limit over here by saying text, and we can say budget.limit, and I can format it over here into currency. And usually you should have the currency with the local code over here. I think I'm just going to hard code it for now. I'm just going to say US dollar, and you can see that it all automatically converts it to US dollar. Now, obviously, if I'm using this app in a different part of the world, then US dollar is not going to be my currency. Now, it's going to be something different. So make sure that you are writing code over here that is giving you the current currency code. So I can go ahead and add another extension over here. I can say locale plus extension. So whatever is locale set, that is the currency that you should be returning. So I can go ahead and create an extension on the locale and just return the current identifier. If it's not found, then we're going to reset it to US dollar. So now I can go over here and use locale.currency, currency code. Okay, and obviously we can add a little bit of a spacer over here so that everything looks nicer. There we go. Okay. So now we can display the currency. We can display the different budget items. I can get another budget item for entertainment, and I can also have a limit of, let's say, $450. And there we go. So everything is working out perfectly fine. We can actually display our currency, which is great. All right. Okay. Any questions, anyone? Everyone can enjoying it. Everyone can see everything clearly. Everyone is understanding it. I think that's the question. If you're understanding it, then go ahead and I don't know if you can give a thumbs up or something, or write something in the chat message, so I know that you are still here. All right. Okay, let's see. The next step is to add a transaction for a budget. Right now we can see all the budgets, but we cannot see, or we cannot really add transactions. Transaction simply means that if you're buying food, what kind of food did you buy? Like, did you buy a burger or a pizza or a sandwich, or a salad? Or what if you took a vacation, what kind of a transaction did you do in the vacation, like a rental car, airfare, hotel, these kind of things. So let's go ahead and do that. So before I do that, I will need to create some sort of a budget details screen. So I'm just going to go over here and create another screen over here, which will simply be a view. I'll call it budget detail screen. Okay, there we go. Okay. So budget detail screen will be responsible for allowing the user to add a transaction for a budget and also viewing all the transactions. And once again, the transaction simply means that what is inside the budget. So now the question from William is, so there's no entity screen. There is no model. Yeah, so there are no models. Remember the data mapping model in core data? Well, that is gone. There's no more visual models, no more entity screens. This is your entity. It is all reflected, represented in code. All right, so that's, I think, good because nicer, easier to do rather than doing it in the interface. Let's go back to the budget list screen. Right now you can see in the budget list screen that I can't even click on any of these things like food, vacation, and entertainment. I can't click. There's no click. They're not clickable. So I need them to be clickable, which basically means I need a navigation stack. So I'm just going to go ahead and put everything inside a navigation stack. And this is only for the preview, by the way, right? I mean, if I want to put everything in a navigation stack, I need to make sure that I do that in my budget app file also. So somewhere over here, I will probably also do the navigation stack. This is when the application is actually running on a device. And the model container, I will move it up to the window group. So it's kind of like at a much higher level rather than anything else. Okay. Let's go to the budget list screen again. Okay, so in the budget list screen, I want to make my edge stack tappable, meaning I can tap. Again, it would be a good idea to create this as a separate control, like a budget view, but I'm just being lazy, so I'm not going to do that, but you can do that. All right, so I'm just going to try to see that if I can wrap this whole thing inside a navigation link. Or maybe I'll do that later. All right. The value that will be passing will be the budget, and the label, meaning the something that will be displayed on the screen, will be the edge stack, which is right here. So there we go. So now we have everything inside the navigation link, and that is why you can see all of these arrows. If I press on the arrow, it doesn't really do anything, or if I press on the food or vacation or entertainment, it doesn't really do anything, because we haven't really identified that where it will go. So we still need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of like at the very top level, going to add a navigation destination for budget type, and then I'll get access to the budget because that is the value that's being set. That's going to be passed over here when you click on any of the links or any of the navigation link. And where I want to go is the budget detail screen. All right. Obviously, we're not really passing the budget to the detail, but our first step is, can we even show the detail screen? So if I click on food, now it takes us to the budget detail screen. Great. So at least we are going to the budget detail screen, but we're not really passing anything to the budget detail screen. So let's go back to the budget detail screen. And what we will do is we will try to make sure that the budget details screen is getting the budget. So this means that there is a dependency on the budget. You need to pass in the budget. There we go. Now if I do this, the preview is going to complain that, hey, you got to pass in the budget. And we can fix this, all right? So let's see how we can fix this part. It's going to be a little bit of a longer fix, but we can try to fix it. How do I pass in, and this is just for the preview, how do I pass in a budget over here, right? And that budget has to be something that is coming from the SwiftData persistent storage. So I can't really perform any query over here. I mean, I can't really type this over here. It's not going to work. So in these situations, whether you're using the core data fetch request, or whether you're using, which is right now, you're using SwiftData, you can solve this problem by multiple ways, but I'm going to go ahead and create another budget details screen view, which will be a container view. All right, and the container view is going to be rendering the budget details screen, passing in the budgets and the first item of the budget. And where do I get the budget? Well, I can use query in the parent, meaning I can use query in the container, and I will render the container over here. So budget detail screen container. So this is called the container presenter model, where the container over here is doing kind of like the job and passing it to the presenter. The presenter is the budget detail screen. So very common pattern in React application. Make sure to import SwiftData, by the way. All right, so hopefully that should work. Let's see. Okay, so hopefully that will work. So this is a container presenter pattern. The container that we created over here, it will only be used for previews. I don't even know if it's working correctly. I don't think it works correctly. I think it, for previews and working with data or, oh, sorry, hold on. I think I forgot something. I need to insert this thing also, right? The model container, or else it will not know anything. Without the model container, the query will not work. Okay, let's see if that works. Nope, it doesn't like it. I think what it's asking me to do is it's asking me to create kind of like a fake container, all right, which, or maybe the issue is over here, maybe, all right. So budget, and then passing in the budget, let's see. So maybe that was the problem. Let's go back to over here and see if this works. Okay, so this works. So sometimes what happens is that, or sometimes what you want to do or what you wish to do when you're working with Xcode previews is that you don't really want to use the real persistent container. I mean, although it's fine to use it, I mean, I do it all the time. You want to create a fake preview container, which is only used for previews. We can do that, but I mean, I'll show you an article where I covered that. Right now, I'm using a real container, which means that it is going to persist information all the way to the SQLite real database. But over here in the model container, you can pass in for your previews, you can pass in a fake container that is in memory so that once you refresh the screen or rebuild, everything from the memory is gone. So you can do that, but I don't really want to do that. I do want it to persist, or else I'll be creating budgets again and again. So I don't want to do that. Okay. All right, what else? Let's see. Do we need a navigation stack in the detail screen? Yeah, we do need a navigation stack. So let's go ahead and wrap it up with a navigation stack also. There we go. And now we can go ahead and probably display some stuff over here, right? So if I go ahead and display the navigation title, like budget.name, there we go, food. So we are able to display something over here, all right? Let's go back to the budget list screen and see if our navigation works correctly. I can click on food. Okay, I can go to the food. I can click on vacation. I'm on vacation. Entertainment, entertainment. So it looks like everything is working correctly. But once we go to the budget detail screen, we want to add a transaction. Transaction being expense, all right? This means that we need to first start by creating the model for the transaction. Just like the budget model that we have, I'm just going to go ahead and add a transaction model. You can call it receipt or receipt. That's fine. I'm just going to call it transaction. Transaction. And first of all, import again SwiftData. Create a class called transaction. And now you have to be careful over here as what do you want to save in a transaction. Okay. So I'm going to say that, well, I want to save the name of the transaction, like if I bought a burger, amount of the transaction, the date of the transaction, and the quantity. I mean, I can buy 2 burgers, right? So that will be the quantity. I can buy 2 sodas if I want to. So that will be the quantity of the transaction. And that is going to come into play a little bit later on. And the next thing I'm going to do is, in order to create a transaction, I only need the name and the amount because the date and quantity does have a default value, so I'm not going to pass it in. And since this transaction class needs to be persisted, we need to make sure it is decorated with the model macro. All right. This transaction will belong to a budget, so that is the relationship that we need to create. You also need to make sure that this relationship is optional. If it's not optional, then it kind of complains and it kind of kills itself. I mean, it doesn't work. And this is from a belongs to relationship, like a relationship from transaction to the budget. But the budget also has a relationship with the transaction. And that relationship is a one-to-many relationship. So we are going to go ahead and add transactions over here, which is an array of transactions, which we just created. It's an empty array. And we will create a relationship. So there's a relationship macro that you can use. I always confuse that if it's a macro or if it's like a property wrapper. So it's a macro. Okay, so we can use the macro relationship, and we can also put some options in there like cascade. Cascade simply means if I delete a budget, then all the transactions of that budget will also be deleted automatically, which is fine, which is great, which is what I want. All right, so we have this, we have the transactions. Let's make it plural. And let's go back to the budget details screen. Now we can start building our user interface where we can add a particular transaction. Okay. For that, I'm going to go ahead and add again the name of the transaction and the amount of the transaction. There we go, two state variables. And I will also add a form. So kind of like the old different page that we built, it's very similar to that one. And then I will add a section over here. I'm just going to drag and drop the section, and we'll probably delete something from there. There we go. Okay. So new transaction. Is form valid? Again, we need to make sure that the form is valid. So I'll go ahead and add that property, which will make sure that the UI is working correctly. There we go. And hopefully we can see the new transaction in our interface, meaning the interface to create a new transaction. Okay. Now we need to implement the save transaction. How do we save a transaction? Save transaction. All right, let's go ahead and create save transaction. Save transaction. What do we do in the save transaction? Again, I can go ahead and add kind of like another layer of security over here by unwrapping and all that stuff, making sure that the amount is unwrapped, making sure that the name is not empty. I can go ahead and create a transaction. Transaction equals to transaction, passing in the name of the transaction and the amount of the transaction. And then we already have the budget, right? So I can say budget dot transactions dot append. And then what do we want to append? The transaction. There we go. So this is going to add the transaction. It's nice and simple, right? So this is how we will add the transaction. Now, here's a very interesting question. If I'm adding 2 burgers, then I don't really want to see transaction of 2 burgers. Maybe I want to see, and that's just our requirement, I want to see the quantity of the transaction, the quantity of that transaction incremented, right? So that is what I want to do. So that's kind of like the business logic I want to execute now. And when you want to execute business logic, you don't really want to put the business logic right over here because you may want to share it, you may want to reuse it again and again. So if I'm using this code to add a transaction to a budget, then it's not really allowing me to add the business logic or to fire a business logic or to perform some business logic, all right? So the other way that you can do that, and it depends on your scenario, the other way you can do that is that you can restrict people from changing the transactions using the transactions property. And you can do that by simply saying over here, private set, which means that it can only be set privately, meaning from inside the budget class. But this means that nobody can change the transaction. Nobody can add a transaction to a budget, which we don't, we want to allow people to add a transaction, obviously. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function called add transaction. And this is based on the requirement. You may not have to do that, but if I want to execute some business logic, then I will have to do something similar to that. Over here, I'm going to find out the existing transaction, and I'm going to just copy the code and see if that will work. So basically what we're doing over here, we're running this business logic, and I'm trying to find out that if existing transaction with the existing name exists, if it does exist, then we will go ahead and update the quantity of the transaction. Now, what is update quantity function? It's literally incrementing the quantity. So it doesn't even have to be a function, but I just want it to be fancy, so I created that. Literally this one. There we go. Okay, so the business logic is still inside our models, and you can easily test it if you want to. YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. Okay, I'm not sure why I'm getting a message over here. Okay, it should be okay. Hopefully everyone can see the video. Okay, so going back, and now we can call update quantity. So the reason that we added add transaction function inside the budget is that this is a business logic, and I don't really want to put my business logic in the view because I may have to reuse it. And I can easily test it later on also. Going back to the budget details screen, instead of this appending the transaction, I can now simply say add transaction and then add a transaction. Nice and simple. I think this allows us to kind of isolate the logic into the model itself. All right, so this is great. Let's go ahead and add a transaction. I think this should add a transaction to whichever item that we select. So I'm just going to go into budget list screen. And we already have some existing budget. So I'm going to go to food and let's go ahead and add a transaction. I'm going to say burger. And currently we are not displaying any transaction. We still have to display the transactions. Let's say $10 burger. Oh no, it crashed. Oh no, what did we do wrong now? All right. Not sure what we did wrong. I don't really remember doing anything wrong over here. Let me see. Adding a transaction should be okay. All right. Let's list the transaction also. Probably I messed up somewhere, but let's try to list the transaction also. So probably I'm messing it somewhere in the code. All right, so listing the transactions. We're going to create another section over here. There we go. And over here, you can see that we are listing the transactions. So we are going through the transactions array over here. We are showing the name of the transaction. We are showing the actual date of the transaction. Transaction total is something that we need to calculate. So I think I'll go into my transaction and I will allow another property which will not be persisted into the database. It's more of a transient property, and that will simply calculate the total. And let's go back again. Getting some errors over here. And let's try to build it again. Okay, so it currently doesn't really display the transactions. Okay, so let's see what's going on. So the business logic, which is, let's see over here. I don't know why it's showing me the business logic, which in the past we have gone into a view model, can go into the model itself. So I don't really, yeah, so that's a very good question, right? I personally, and this is just my personal opinion, and obviously you have your own choices. If you are following me, and this is for Murray Alamin, if you have been following me on Twitter, you know that I don't really write view models. All right, because from my understanding and my experience, the view itself, when we create a view itself, that is already a view model. So you don't really need to create, or I personally don't create view models for anything. All right. If you want to create view models, that is fine. Just make sure that you understand you won't be able to access all of these modifiers, query modifier, environment modifier inside the view model. So it will be hard to access those things. I mean, you can still do it, but it will be kind of like reinventing the wheel. Now, keeping in mind that I'm trying my best to not put any business logic inside my budget list screen. I'm trying my best not to put any business logic inside my budget details screen. That is why I created this add transaction function where I can have my business logic, if any. All right. So that is the advantage that I get. I get to use everything that Apple is releasing. And you can see that whenever a transaction is added, query runs and it fetches all the stuff. All right. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so we're getting some issues and I'm not sure why is this happening. Let me go ahead and run this in the actual simulator, maybe that will help and give us some clue as what exactly went wrong. So probably I'm doing something wrong. Okay, so we have food over here. I'm going to click on food. Okay, wow. I think I already added some stuff over here from the last time. So let me go ahead and add something else. Let's get entertainment, budget for $200, save it. It might crash because I don't know why it's crashing. So let's go ahead and for entertainment, I'm going to say movies, $10. Okay, it's added. I don't know what was wrong with Xcode Previews. You can see it's being added. Transaction is getting added. Let me go ahead and add the same transaction again, because let's say that I went to another movie and I added a transaction and I called it movies. And there we go. You can see that the quantity is updated to 2 instead of another transaction of movies. Now, this is kind of like up to you. Maybe you want to see another movie as a transaction, but I was just showing you that if you had any business logic where if you try to add a transaction with the same name, then the quantity of that thing will be updated instead of adding it as a brand new transaction. So this might be completely not feasible in your application, but I just wanted to show you that how you can do that in a way that you put your business logic inside the model itself. All right. What else? Let's see. Let me go ahead and run this because I want to see if we are displaying some stuff or not. Okay, so yeah, it is displaying all the stuff. Let's go to entertainment. You can see that I'm displaying the date of the transaction, and this stuff is displaying in a currency. So if you ever want to format the date, you can use the built-in modifier for formatting the date. You can see over here I'm using the built-in modifier, which is date.formatted and formatted into numeric time omitted, and that will format the date for you. So you don't really have to write your own functions to format a date. There are a lot of built-in modifiers that you can use to format the date. All right. And I think that's pretty much it. I mean, we learned a lot of stuff in I guess in this 1 hour. You learn about how to set up your code, how to set up your screens and all that stuff. And apart from that, we kind of like build the application, a very basic application for storing our budgets as well as storing our transactions. All right. Now, this is the kind of like the architecture I use if I'm working with SwiftData or core data. I mean, obviously you can use any architecture you want, but this is kind of like the architecture I use. I find it nice and simple, and it's much easier to, to change. It's much easier to maintain and all that stuff. All right. Any other questions? So you can see that we created this app rather quickly using all the different features that were provided by Apple. One of them using the query modifier, using the manage context, model context, and all that stuff. So that is how I do it. I mean, you may be doing it in a different way, which is fine. I just find this much simpler for me to use. All right. All right, everyone. Any questions regarding anything that we saw today? Any questions? All right. Okay. Let me see. If you want to learn a little bit more about, let me see if I can find it. Trying to see if I can find this stuff. If you want to learn more about SwiftData, then I would recommend, I have written articles on that, so let me actually find the article. Here we go. I'm just going to post it right there in the chat. That's an article. It's a pretty long article, so you can definitely read that in many days. And I also have a course on SwiftData. Not sure why the referral code is not really working, But let me find the referral code for you so you can use that code if you want to. You don't have to buy the course if you don't want to, but I'll just give you the referral code. Referral code is kind of broken over here for some reason, and I didn't fix that. So let me find that for you. But yeah, I mean, my advice, and again, it's not like you have to take the advice or not, but my advice is when you're using Swift UI, then try to use it in a way that Apple is suggesting. All right. And here is a link to my course right there. Because if you try to wrap Swift UI with a different architecture, or if you try to do stuff that is a little bit different, then you will find some weird stuff going on with Swift UI. So I mean, I used to use a lot of view models and MVVM and all that stuff. But 1 year ago, I started, probably exactly like 1 year ago, I stopped because I was not really getting anywhere, and it was just the progress that I was making was not good, and I was not really happy with the progress. And I started using the stuff which Apple designed it, or the Apple is recommending in a way to use. And then I saw that, okay, this is all working much nicely. Here's my another article. If you want to read Building Large Scale Application for Swift UI, it's a pretty long article again, and this goes through the process of building larger applications using client server development and maybe a little bit even core data. But this is a pretty long article. It goes into many different things. All right. Do you mirror your Apple Store apps for Android phones? If so, what software do you use? Mirror my Apple Store apps? I don't. No, I don't create Android applications. So I don't know. I mean, I think I've only created iOS application or iPhone applications. What architecture do I use? Well, it depends. All right, it depends on what I'm building. If I'm building, and there are mostly, I would say, two kinds of applications, right? Well, there are three kinds of application, but I would say more common application, for me at least, is client-server application. Client-server application is basically where you have a server, which is returning JSON, and you have a client, which is you, which is Swift UI. So for client-server application, I think I would go with this architecture that you see on the screen. It doesn't really have any name. People call it MV, but they misunderstood MV when other people try to explain it. But so for client-server application, I use the architecture discussed in this long post, Building Large Applications, Guide to Modular Architecture. And that's what I use for client-server applications. If I'm building a Swift data or core data application, then the architecture that you have seen is the one that I use. What apps do you have for sale on the App Store? I don't have any apps on the App Store on sale, or I don't even know if they are on the App Store because I haven't updated the apps. I do have courses, and that is something you can definitely check. So if you're interested in those courses, you can always go to Udemy and check out the different courses that I have. But apps, I don't have any apps on the App Store at this point. No, I used to, a lot of apps, but I haven't updated any of these apps for a very long time. So they got removed by Apple, or they got retired from Apple. All right. All right, any other questions? And maybe in the future I'll do it. I'll do another session about building client-server applications and how my architecture will be a little bit different when you're doing client-server application versus when I'm doing SwiftData applications or something else. Have you used SwiftData with client-server apps and JSON? I have not used it. No, I have not used it. No. So I think in those cases, will that architecture work with UIKit? No, I wouldn't say that, because a UI kit, I think your architecture mostly will go with MVC, which is Model View Controller, unless you're doing something else, that's fine. But this architecture, uh, which I'm talking about, is not something that I developed. I mean, I'm not smart enough to come up with an architecture. This is the architecture that Apple is using, right? So this is not something that I come out of thin air. This is just the thing that Apple, and I have screenshots over here somewhere. Let's see if I can find it. Do I find it? Is it up there? Oh, not in this article, but client server, right? So we're talking about client server apps. This is from Apple, and even this is from Apple. And most people haven't really watched this video. This is from a session, Use Xcode for Server-Side Development. I think it's from 2022, in which Apple talk a little bit about how they would build the application. All right, but again, that's just my preference. It doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong or right or wrong. It might be right for you. That's fine. Are there any aspect of SwiftData that we should be careful of using, or is pretty solid? No, it's not solid. It is not solid. It has a lot of problems. And some of the problems are that it is keep on changing. And those are minor things that you need to update. Like I think with Xcode 15 beta 5, which was released yesterday, the predicates as well as sort modifier were broken. I mean, the fix was very simple, but they were broken. The other thing which I have discussed in my article, The Ultimate Guide to Building SwiftData Application, is somewhere over here. If you try to connect your relationships and try to query your relationships, kind of like this, then you will get some weird issues like codable stuff. So it is not solid yet. It is obviously beta. So hopefully when they release it, they will fix these issues, unless I'm doing something wrong. I also found a lot of issues with migrations or versioning that is covered in my course. So I did find a lot of issues over there also. So hopefully those things will be fixed in the future. But definitely I'm excited about SwiftData, as it is a very good improvement and it's very Swifty, SwiftUI-like. It really nicely integrates with SwiftUI, which is great. And okay, good to know. You mean broken in beta 5 or the beta 5 fixed it? Well, beta 5 kind of changed it. This is still broken, I think. I haven't really checked, but this is still broken. In beta 5, Xcode previews for SwiftData are broken. So that's not going to work. And that is the main reason that I'm not using Xcode 15 beta 5 for this example. I'm using Xcode 15 beta 2, in which the previews actually work, which you already saw. Previews are working. Other things that are still broken, well, I guess it changed it. The sort modifier, they changed it. I think this is still broken. I think transformables, when you want to save a color or things like that, yeah, color or data type in SwiftData, I think that is still broken. So a lot of things are still broken. All right. So hopefully they'll fix it in the future. William Smith, I bought the SwiftData Udemy course, will start soon. Well, thank you so much for buying that. And I just pushed out a new update adding versioning and migrations, so that you should be able to watch that. It's a small section that covers that. By September, October. Okay, yes. All right, that's pretty much it, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Hope you have enjoyed this. I will share this link if you ever wanted to check out my other courses. That's fine. And hopefully we'll be able to do this on bi-weekly basis or so. And next time maybe I'll cover like client server application and how I design my client server applications, which you'll see that it's a little bit different, I think. All right. So thank you so much for coming. I think that's pretty much it. And again, thank you. and I hope to see you in the future. All right. And there's my contact information and all that if you need. But thank you so much.